Welcome back to another episode of the D-League. Today we have the special ability to celebrate our 30th anniversary. Yeah, so it's the 30th episode today. And today, like you could already hear, we are going to talk about abilities. Previously we talked about melee weapons and ranged weapons and jumping and moving. And so today we're going to talk about abilities in video games. And well, abilities, that's very general, but you can kind of sum it up in just one sentence. And an ability in a video game is pretty much something that's out of the ordinary, that is locked behind a restriction most of the time, and can be pretty much be everything. Like, the ability can be to shoot a fireball. You can stop time, or maybe the abilities to steal items, things like that. And so yeah, you like an ability is just something special, from walking left and right and jumping, and maybe like attacking with your melee weapon or with your ranged weapon. Something that adds on top of it and is different. And yeah, Bilal, when you think of abilities, usually we go with mechanics and visuals. And I guess concerning mechanics, it depends on what ability you try to implement. So which abilities or kind of mechanics can you think of in different genre? Can you give some examples?
Of just ability mechanics in different genres.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So, I guess the one I think of first is obviously like a MOBA, because those are kind of based around abilities. You'll have a basic spell and then some number of abilities. Where what they'll do is some of them will use mana, or they can use health. Basically, they require some resource and then have a cooldown, so you can't use it repetitively. So yeah, my first one would be like a mobile ability. And an RTS ability is not very different. It's pretty much the same thing, because they kind of come from RTS. And then I also think of something like a hack and slash, where you'll obviously have like your combos, which are regular attacks, but then you'll have an ability to, say, maybe shield bash somebody, or shoot some crazy spell out there that looks really flashy. So yeah, those are the main. I also think of like third-person shooters, kind of like Mass Effect had abilities for like the kinetic stuff and that kind of stuff. So yeah, those are the genres I think of mostly, I think.
But you're not thinking about role-playing games? That's kind of strange.
Well, Mass Effect is a role-playing game, so technically.
Okay, so you're pulling the option select on me. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I go with it. Yeah, so like in role-playing games, I guess that's kind of where it's most essential, I think, to have a special ability. Because just imagine you are playing a role-playing game, and all you can do is like swing your sword.
Yeah.
That's really boring. Or it's like if you go into those medieval RPGs, you have like a paladin, a sorceress, or like an assassin or thief or whatever, and the way how they like differ from each other are the abilities. So like the thief is quick, maybe he can like jump around or steal stuff, or maybe he evades most attacks, things like that. While like the paladin might be able to heal or get invulnerable, or give himself buffs, or his allies buffs, things like that. So like the whole thing in role-playing games is that characters feel different because they have different abilities. Because else, I mean, everyone can kind of attack, so that's how they feel different. And like you talked about RTS, and in I guess in RTS it's you have different abilities. So you have like passive abilities and active abilities. Um, for example, maybe you have a unit that can switch modes. So where maybe like you have a unit that can switch between melee and ranged, and if it's a melee unit, it runs faster or has higher armor. I mean, that's also an ability. But then you have this spellcaster units that have special abilities that you have to activate and to use. Maybe you have some area of effect spell, like you said in MOBA, maybe like a Rain of Fire, or like the acid spray of the alchemist in Dota 2. But then you have like target abilities as well that are only used on one unit, and I mean, that's all design decisions. What you want to have, is the ability supposed to like help you? Is it supposed to damage one enemy? Is it supposed to damage multiple enemies? Is it supposed to maybe slow down multiple enemies? And of course, you also said that abilities are restricted by, for example, a cooldown, or something like a mana or energy restriction. So you cannot spam it all the time. So you cannot use it all the time. You have to think you have to think about how you're gonna use the ability, or when you want to use it. And I mean, that way you also balance abilities that are very strong, but they're very expensive concerning mana, or maybe you can just use it every 5 minutes, so you want to really think about, should I use it now, or is it a waste, kind of thing. Yeah, so that's kind of like the restrictions. And I guess concerning first-person shooters, for example, you don't have first-person shooters that have a lot of abilities, I think, or because most of the time they are kind of tied to items, for example, or you can only have 2 or 3 abilities that you cycle through, because else, I mean, you're playing with your keyboard and mouse, so like your 2 hands are already occupied, or are always on some button or like on the mouse, and so you don't want to switch keys all the time to activate abilities, or maybe it's very difficult to activate abilities while moving. So I think FPS are a genre that kind of is not very known for special abilities, more for weapon variety, I think. So I guess like the abilities are more put into items and weapons in this case.
I think it can depend on the game. I do agree that FPS is definitely not known for abilities, but I mean, if you look at Crysis or like Deus Ex, at least the new 2 ones, or the 2 new ones. I mean, like Crysis, for example, Crysis 1 had, you could say, 5 abilities that would all just use, actually more than 5 abilities, but they wouldn't activate by you pressing the right buttons. Like, you would switch to a mode, and then you would use an ability kind of by doing something. So, for example, if you were in strength mode, your jumps and punches would be a lot more powerful, but they'd use energy, right? And so in Crysis, and it was the same with like speed mode, sprinting. There was a cloak that would passively drain, and if you moved, it would drain faster. So those are examples where Crysis didn't have cooldowns between switching modes, but if you drained your energy all the way down, then obviously you wouldn't be able to use anything and you'd have to wait. So that's kind of like what the cooldown was. It was basically just the resource drain. And in terms of like Deus Ex, like I just said, you also could, I mean, you could consider a lot of stuff as abilities, I guess. Like, for example, if you were to knock people unconscious or do a like stealth kill, that would take like an energy cell, and so it wouldn't really have a cooldown, but it would also be based on resources, which is kind of a common thing, I guess, in FPS, because I guess I guess that people are less interested in having abilities with cooldowns than they are in feeling more immersed by like using an item to gain energy when you really need it, and then using an ability when you're in trouble, for example. So yeah, stuff like cloaking, takedowns. What else? You know, like I guess certain kinds of detection. I mean, it really depends on the FPS.
Yeah, I agree. My example for FPS was actually Duke Nukem 3D, where they had items that you could pick up, like steroids, which you would activate, and then you run, I think, like 200% faster. So you run you move at 300% speed, and I think the game, like there are some bugs with it, with the game, that you could glitch through walls because you were too fast. So like in Duke Nukem 3D, you could you pick up items and then decide when to use it, but then it's a consumable. So if you use up this item, then well, you lose the item. While like you say in Deus Ex, in the newer Deus Ex games, or like in an RPG, you just wait maybe for your mana to recover, and then you can use your abilities again.
Yeah.
But with consumable items, well, they just vanish, and you have to find a new one.
Yeah.
Else, yeah, I guess like you said. Wait, did you actually say that? But I think third person games. So for example, what came to mind for me was Max Payne 1, which kind of blew, I think, everyone's mind when that game came out, because you had the movie Matrix being released, and everyone was hype because of that bullet time thing, and then they implemented bullet time, or I don't know if Max Payne did it first, or Matrix did it first, but they had that bullet time feature, or that ability to slow down the game, and that was so great to have it in the game, like that's why you played that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a really good game, but that's where that's just the cherry on top. Like, that feature was so good and so fun to use. It works in a third person shooter, but imagine you would play a first person shooter, and then suddenly you slow down time, or you maybe even turn back time, like where you walk backwards, and then suddenly, well, you just stop where you've been 10 seconds before. It maybe just looks very strange. So I think, like, in the third person game, you're not as restricted from the design of the abilities as in a first person view.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are also expecting abilities more inside of a third person, because I mean, in general, FPS has kind of been more on the. Here I am saying in general, but then you have games like TF2. But in general, FPS is like trying to be a more realistic in terms of like giving you an immersive. I'm using a weapon and attacking people with it, or I have these structures and they're like it's what I'm doing rather than something the game is doing. But like with a third-person shooter, like you'll see your character zooming everywhere and doing whatever, like charging, for example, like in Mass Effect.
Yeah, or something like an X spin where like your character turns around 360 degrees.
Yeah.
It works in third person, but it would kind of look weird where you like attack with your axe and then like your field of view spins 360 degrees and
Yeah.
yeah.
It'd be strange.
Yeah, it would be very confusing. And yeah, I mean, concerning mechanics, there's no limit to what you can do in a game. I mean, you just have to have an idea for an ability, or depending on the genre, if it actually kind of works or makes sense. I mean, if you have a fast-paced racing game, that maybe it doesn't make sense to slow down time, or maybe it actually makes sense to slow down time, so you can take turns better or like perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a multiplayer game and does time slow down for everyone, that might be a bit confusing.
Yeah.
Where you want to take a turn, or maybe you're near a pit and you want to steer away, and then time slows down and you don't steer enough, or things like that. And so it also depends if it's single player or multiplayer. Is it like global? If it's multiplayer, I think I can't think of a game where like an ability is really global, where it affects everyone.
I guess MOBAs. That's about it, though, right?
Yeah, but I mean, when I think like globally, then it's like a slowdown effect, or like something that is not just okay. There is a like faceless void chronosphere in Dota 1, where everyone was just stunned when he activated chronosphere, or like it was not an area of effect, but it affected like everything on the map except for faceless void. So yeah, I mean that, yes, it's global, but it's not. I mean, then it becomes a single player game, because that guy is the faceless void player is the only one that can actually do something.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
But...
I mean, I think if there's actually just a quick example, I keep referring to Mass Effect, but like I think in like Mass Effect 3, I believe, the biocharge would like freeze the game or slow it down a lot. So in multiplayer, all they really did was just make it not do that, because it was kind of just a visual effect.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. I mean, else you have desyncs and maybe other issues that if somebody lags, then maybe you just clip through that guy when using the ability, or
exactly.
Who knows? Don't open Pandora's box, I guess.
Right.
I guess every gamer that played some video games can think of his favorite or her favorite ability. If it's healing in RPGs, or like being able to maybe control a bullet in a shooting game or something. There's so much stuff you can do. I mean, we could just talk 2 hours about different abilities in RPGs and FPS and third-person shooters and shit like that. I mean, even racing games. You have racing games with turbo and weapons, and maybe your cars can fly or jump, or it can turn invincible, or maybe you have some key combinations to do a special attack with a weapon. Oof, there's too much to kind of talk about, but
Yeah.
I guess we kind of already talked about like the basic thing. You have an ability, or you want to implement an ability, and because like maybe you have a headshot ability that does like 3 times the damage than a regular shot,
Yeah.
then it would be broken if you could just use it all the time. So
Exactly.
you need to have a restriction, cooldown, mana, whatever, energy, consumable. I guess that's it, pretty much it. And I mean, that's the mechanics of an ability.
Yeah.
You have something and you need to restrict it so it's not broken. Shall we move on to visuals, or is there anything you want to add concerning mechanics, maybe?
Did
Maybe
we
you have-
talk about like the purpose of like, I guess, like in game design wise, like why we even have abilities, I guess, or we?
I kind of said to make characters different, for example, in RPGs, or I mean, in a team shooter, in a team first-person shooter, maybe you have different classes, like a medic, to help people not die during battle, or to revive them. And I mean, it's pretty much you have special abilities to give players an option to play differently. I think,
That's what I would say as well.
or or to not necessarily different style, but to make the gameplay vary at least.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you options to do more than just, like shoot with a gun or hit with a sword. Like, I guess it gives you more variety, but it like restricts that, so you have to use it wisely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe like a knife throw, where you can stab with the knife or you can throw it, and the knife throw does like 5 times the damage, but if you miss, then or even if you hit, you lose your knife or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a high risk, high reward thing. So it's kind of a gamble, maybe.
Yeah.
So anything else?
No, we can move on.
All right, then let's move on to visuals. And for me, what I noted down concerning visuals is that as a developer, you need to give the player some feedback that he used an ability. Else, maybe you just don't even notice it. Like, imagine you have like a time slow ability, but if you don't have any effect, then maybe the player thinks, okay, my game just randomly started slowing down. Is it broken, or is it bugged? Is my computer dying from overheating from rendering the game or something? So in that case, you give it. You give the player something like a blur effect that time has slowed down, or I think in Max Payne they just did a sound effect actually. So the game slowed down, but you had this sound effect that sounded like, it sounded like time slowing down, I guess.
Yeah. Or you can
you have this sound, and they slow down the sound. And then when like the time slow stops, they play it backwards, so it speeds up again.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess that's very, very important to make the player understand what's actually happening in the game.
Yeah, I think it's also kind of common to remove some saturation from the color. like of the game, so like everything will be a little bit less saturated in terms of colors, so it'll look more grayscale like, but not quite there.
Do you have an example for that?
I can't think of anything actually right now, so I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'm making that up, but I for some reason I imagine when I think time slow down, I think of like some of the color will like go more gray, I guess, make it look darker.
Ah, okay, I see. Yeah, I think some games might do that. Or what came to mind for me was something like a blur effect, where it's kind of like I don't know, like a dream sequence or something.
Yeah.
I think like it's a bit blurry, and that's why it's moving slowly. But else, I mean, you can also do stuff like if you have a first-person shooter where you have a special animation, or maybe you switch to a third-person animation, and then you see the spell or something like that, or like a HUD effect where maybe like the HUD turns a different color, or maybe if you have something like steroids, or that increases like the pulse of the character, where maybe like the HUD has some special effect, or like the screen turns red or green, or like you have this reddish hue for berserk ability or something like that. And well, in for example RPGs, you just have special animations where, oh yeah, you summon a dragon, and so it's like yeah, whoosh whoosh, and you move the wand, and then the dragon appears, and then the dragon breathes fire, or whatever your special animation is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like, I guess what I expect from, like, if I use an ability, actually, it's kind of strange. Like, you, as a player, I think you kind of take the effects for granted. Like, you see a really cool effect, and you're like, oh, okay, that's tolerable because he made it very cool. But, like, if the developer were to do, like, a very, like, okay job, or if the effect didn't look very good, you would think it looked very bad, I think. So I think it's, like, important to keep in mind that the ability should, what's the best way? I guess it should be vibrant, right? Or depending on the game, that is. Like, it should be very, like, apparent that, like, I mean, like, yeah, if you're shooting, like, a shadow ball, then maybe it should have, like, a shadowy trailing effect or something like that. Like, come out of your hand, yeah.
Or if you have something like a spell called Apocalypse, so you think, oh yeah, now like the world is gonna end, and then it's like, okay, the ground is shaking a bit, and then there are like 2 cracks in the ground, and then the enemy takes 9,000 damage. It's like, okay, nothing happened, but that was very underwhelming. Okay.
Yeah.
It does damage, but yeah.
Yeah. Actually, that gets me thinking about the shouts in Skyrim. Those are kind of like abilities with just a cooldown, and they actually do a pretty good job, I think, of like communicating the visual with the respective shout. Like, Unrelenting Force like shoots a huge wave of force, I guess, that you can see when you scream it really loud, right? And the one when you mentioned Apocalypse, I actually thought specifically of Stormcall, where the sky will actually get really cloudy, and lightning will strike down on a bunch of enemies and do a lot of damage. So it's actually very, like, the visual is very respective of what the ability actually is. So that's important in my opinion.
Yeah, but I think that as a developer, you should not go overboard with like the feedback that you're giving the player. For example, let's say your special ability in an FPS is to shoot a fireball. Like you're a sorcerer and you can shoot fireballs or something like that. And you shoot the fireball, and then suddenly you see nothing
Yeah.
because the fireball is too huge, or like maybe the smoke. You put so much effort into like the smoke animation, and it's supposed to look good, and maybe it looks good if it's a bit further away from the player, but if it's like in your face and all you see is smoke, then it's like, okay, I use the ability, I cannot see anything right now. That's also very stupid.
Yeah.
So,
I was just gonna say I've been annoyed by that in the past, but I can't quite put my finger on which game it was. But yeah, it should really you want to provide a solution that doesn't keep something in your face when you use an ability.
yeah. Else, I guess in other games, like in RPGs, it would be you have a spell and it has like 2 minutes of summoning animation. That's like okay, it's a good spell, but 2 minutes, no. So like it takes too long, or in an RTS maybe like an explosion, or like the effect is so huge you cannot see the units anymore, or maybe like the effect makes units very difficult to see, and yeah, that in that case it's also not very fun because you don't know what's happening,
Yeah.
because all you see is like a huge explosion, or like smoke or fire, or StarCraft Dark Swarm stacked on top of each other. You don't see anything. Yeah, things like that. So that can be very frustrating, or well, at least not very fun to play.
Yeah, and it's a mistake that even in the big games like League of Legends or Dota, and you mentioned StarCraft. It's like those games do actually make the mistakes where sometimes the abilities are too vibrant, where they'll look good, but they might really obstruct the view of, say, where your character is, where a different character is, or your ability of reaching a certain place because of how obstructive the view of the ability is.
Yeah, you remember seeing like videos of Warcraft 3 where like the title is tell me what's going on or something, and then you have like 20 spellcasters spamming like AoE abilities, or like you have single target abilities, and then you have AoE abilities, and everything is like very close to each other, so it's very piled up, and then you're like, okay, there's like fire and ice and lightning, and then you have like this weird waves around units, like a slow effect and shit like that, and maybe like the ice is giving even an ice effect, an ice slowdown, and so it's like you have 10 abilities stacked on top of each other, and you have like no clue who, if you don't know the game, it's like who is casting the abilities. Like, is it hurting both players? Who casted that ability actually? And then because all the abilities are on top of the units, you don't see the units anymore, so you have no clue who's actually winning.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's like, oh my god, this battle is so hyped, but you don't see what's happening, and then like you have to wait until the dust settles, and then it's like, oh yeah, that player won because I have no clue what went on, but his army survived for some reason.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or like the spam of some Protoss abilities in StarCraft 2. I can't remember what they're called, but like the hexagons plus the I think the
You mean force field?
yeah, plus the Dark Archons. I think you mentioned that actually. Has like some AoE ability with like I think electricity of some sort.
Uh, Wait, do you mean the High Templar Psystorm?
Yeah, that was it actually.
Hmm. Yeah, that. Well, I think that's still pretty clear to
Yeah, I think
see.
I think it's only if you have like, yeah, a lot of them. Anyway.
But like in StarCraft Brood War with Dark Swarm, if you stack, I think even if you just stack two on top of each other, you cannot see through it.
Gotcha.
Like it's just you don't see anything what's under it. You have to remember what the other guy actually put under the Dark Swarm in that case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but else concerning visuals, yeah, I guess at least put some effort into it. That like have a sound, have some animation, or at least something happen when when the player activates an ability, and yeah, just keep it safe and don't go overboard with it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
No. Else concerning abilities, I guess that there's not much more to add. I mean, developers will probably have a lot of fun programming abilities and have them not break the game for some reason. But I guess that's a bit too much in depth for our podcast.
Yeah.
Is there then? Is there anything you want to add at the end now, or
We
are we
covered.
done?
I think in terms of everything, I think we covered most of it because it's kind of a general concept.
Yeah, I think so as well. I guess what our listeners can also think about is how you actually deal with abilities and computer controlled units. I mean, that can be very critical if you have something like a snipe ability and the computer never misses, then maybe it's a bit broken.
Yeah.
If the computer uses it, but yeah, I guess there's a lot of things to keep in mind when using abilities. Not just like the animation and what it is gonna do, but also like to not make it broken or maybe it's good for the player, but it's broken if it's used by a computer, something like that. And yeah.
Yeah.
That's just something that came to my mind right now. I guess you don't have anything else to add?
Well, in terms of your computer comment, I was just thinking. I think that it's best if the AI is supposed to be similar to a player. I think it's best if it's that the ability is like used as similarly to a human player as possible. I think so it doesn't feel like aimbody or hacking like.
Yeah, sniper rifle through the wall. You never saw it coming.
Yeah. It's the wall hacking AI.
Yeah, that's an ability. I mean, some first-person shooters actually have it as an ability, wall hacking. But yeah. Anyway, so then I guess that's it for today for our ability episode. If there's anything you might want to add, or maybe you know some very broken abilities which frustrated you a lot, maybe a CPU unit actually clipping you with a fireball or something through the wall. Maybe you like that, then feel free to comment. Share your best and worst experiences with us. And yeah, if you have a different opinion on abilities and you think, okay, those two guys are actually too stupid to talk about abilities, then please also let us know how stupid we are. And but even if you think we are idiots, then please still tune in next week for episode 31. No clue what we are going to talk about, but I guess it's going to be fun again. And thanks for listening again this week. And I hope you have a nice weekend. Tune in next week again to the D-League.